In the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Grove, where picket fences lined neat lawns and laughter often danced in the air, there stood a house unlike any other. Its appearance was ordinary, but its secrets lurked within. Maria, a young maid desperate for work, found herself knocking on the door of this peculiar house one brisk autumn morning. Mrs. Edith Monroe, the elegant yet stern owner, greeted her with a curt nod and ushered her inside. Maria's duties were clear: clean, cook, and maintain the household. Simple enough, or so she thought. As Maria began her daily chores, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled upon her. The house seemed to whisper secrets, and shadows danced in the corners of her vision. But it was the refrigerator that intrigued her the most. A sleek, stainless steel monolith standing ominously in the kitchen, it seemed to hold a sinister allure. One day, unable to resist her curiosity any longer, Maria approached the refrigerator with cautious steps. Just as her trembling hand reached for the handle, Mrs. Monroe's sharp voice pierced the air. "Don't you dare touch that, girl!" she snapped, her eyes flashing with warning. Maria recoiled, chastised and frightened, but the seed of curiosity had been planted. She couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that something sinister lurked behind those chilled doors. Days turned into weeks, and Maria's unease only grew. She found herself haunted by nightmares of blood and screams, her sleep disturbed by whispered voices that seemed to echo through the walls. And still, the refrigerator taunted her, its contents a mystery she longed to unravel. Finally, driven by a desperate need to know the truth, Maria waited until Mrs. Monroe was out of the house before creeping back to the kitchen. With trembling hands, she flung open the refrigerator door and gasped at the sight that greeted her. Rows of neatly arranged jars filled with human organs and plastic-wrapped body parts stared back at her, their cold, lifeless gaze sending shivers down her spine. Before she could comprehend the horror before her, a sudden noise behind her made her whirl around in terror. Mrs. Monroe stood in the doorway, her face contorted with rage as she advanced towards Maria with a glinting knife in her hand. "You shouldn't have looked, my dear," she hissed, her voice dripping with malice. With a strength born of desperation, Maria fought back, but Mrs. Monroe was relentless. In a frenzied struggle, Maria managed to break free, but before she could escape, Mrs. Monroe grabbed a nearby hammer and swung it with force, striking Maria on the head. Everything went dark as Maria fell to the ground unconscious. When Maria finally regained consciousness, she found herself in a cold, dimly lit basement. Her head throbbed with pain as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. To her horror, she realized that she was tied to a table, completely nude. Mrs. Monroe stood nearby, a sinister smile playing on her lips as she prepared her tools. Maria's heart raced with fear as she realized the terrible fate that awaited her. With a surge of adrenaline, she summoned every ounce of strength she had left. In a desperate bid for survival, Maria managed to free one of her hands from the ropes binding her to the table. With newfound determination, Maria launched herself at Mrs. Monroe, catching her off guard. A fierce struggle ensued, with Maria using all her might to overpower her captor. In a moment of opportunity, Maria broke free and fled from the basement, leaving Mrs. Monroe stunned and defeated. Running through the dark streets, naked and bruised, Maria finally reached the safety of the police station. Breathless and trembling, she recounted the terrifying ordeal she had endured at the hands of Mrs. Monroe. And though she was battered and exposed, Maria knew that she had escaped the clutches of a deranged killer, her will to survive stronger than ever before. And as the officers descended upon the house on Willow Grove, they uncovered a horror beyond imagination. In the dark depths of the basement, they found a grisly tableau of death and decay. 17 bodies, mutilated and defiled, lay strewn amidst the shadows, their final moments a testament to the twisted desires of a deranged killer. Mrs. Monroe, it turned out, had been preying on the unsuspecting residents of Willow Grove for years, luring them into her home with promises of hospitality before subjecting them to unspeakable horrors. As Maria watched from a safe distance, her hands trembling with shock and relief, she vowed never to forget the chilling truth that lurked behind closed doors. And though the scars of that fateful encounter would never fully heal, she knew that she had escaped the clutches of evil her survival a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable darkness.